and that means that it's time for our show, our daily show. Before we start, I'd just like to let you know that we are open 7 days a week, 9:30 to 5, Monday through Saturday, and Sundays we're open 1. So if you would like to come through and have a fun experience, meeting some animals, drawing some pictures, getting some hands-on science, then feel free. And if you have any questions that you'd like to ask about this after the show, or you just want to chat, then please come through. So today what we're going to be talking about are migratory birds, or in general just migration. Birds that migrate, birds that don't. Why is it that some birds migrate? Why is it that some birds don't migrate? And what are the differences? How can we tell them apart? So the first thing to think about in any ecological or sort of life system is energy. Where is the energy? How does that interact with it? And that is actually one of the key distinctions between migratory birds, birds which fly south in the winter, for example, to keep warm or find food, versus residential birds, birds that stay in their spot. What are some of those differences? So we'll start talking just in kind of generalities, just in kind of the big picture. We'll zoom back, and we'll just talk about general features of a migratory bird. So my example of a migratory bird here is a Merganzer duck. And if you live around Bemidji, you may have seen these. There's a pretty good chance you've seen them. They change colors and get kind of interesting colors during mating season. And I think they're a very noble looking animal. But so this is an example of a bird that migrates, that goes south when it gets cold in the winter. And why might they do that? The first thing is that their diet is limited compared to other birds. So these mergansers mostly rely on eating fish. They're piscivores, which is the word for that. Piscivorous, if you will. That means fish eating. And what that means, if you think about it, is to fish you need water. And if the lake ices over, as it probably will start to do here in Bemidji pretty soon, it gets harder and harder to fish. It gets harder and harder to find new spots and open water. And so the outcome of that is that they are forced to fly south and find open water. Another thing that you may notice is that these guys are a little bit more sleek. They have kind of a sort of almost, I don't know, cone-shaped body in a way that can kind of cut through the water so that they can swim as well as fly. And it's harder to see, but compared to my other birds, which we'll get to, these guys have their wings down so you can't tell, but the wingspan is longer on these migratory birds. It makes it easier to go a long distance, to fly a long ways. They have less mass on their bodies. There's less fat, less muscle, other than in the wings. All of this makes them kind of like a long-haul plane or something. And basically, the way that I would kind of sum all of that up is that migratory birds are more specialized. They are birds that are set for a specific environment. They want water. They want certain temperatures, so they're not getting too cold. They want a certain variety of food. And if they're not getting that, then they'll move to find that environment rather than changing their strategy to meet their changing environment. So let's see if I missed anything else to mention here. Yeah, I think that's about all we need to talk about to start with the merganser, and we'll move on to a very recognizable bird here. This is the rock pigeon, the rock dove. It's a very, very common, there's something like 120 to 130 million of these in the world. They come from all over. Originally, they came from the desert in the Middle East. I don't know exactly where, but in sort of more of the Eastern Mediterranean arid portions, that's where they would come from, and they would nest up on rock cliffs. And so these birds do not migrate. but they kind of operate in sort of a in-between space in a way, because they can, if they have a nesting spot, then you bring them far away, they'll be able to find their way back. They'll be able to fly back home, and you can bring them a long way. You can bring them even 500,000 miles, and they will fly back to where they're meant to be. And the reason for that, the thought at least, the hypothesis, if you will, which is a sort of educated explanation for why something happens, that still is yet to be completely confirmed with evidence. The hypothesis is that being from the arid flat desert, that these birds had no landmarks when they would leave to go and search for food to find their way home. So they naturally evolved some sort of magnetic system, or maybe they navigate by the stars. We're not exactly sure, to navigate back home. And these guys have really interesting uses too. They've been domesticated by people. In World War I, they were very important to communication and logistics, because you send them through the air to bring messages in small parcels. That would be less common, more messages. And so what's interesting about these is that these don't migrate. They will stay, even in like Bemidji, in a cold environment, in a cold area, for the entire winter. And there's a few reasons that are distinctive from the Merganzer duck as to why they're able to do that. The first reason is just a simple notion that, if you can see, they have a little bit more meat on them. They're just a little bit more kind of fluffed up. They got a little bit more fat on their chests, and they have a little bit less surface area, and as such they kind of hold in warmth better. And these are very social birds. They will tend to flock together. They mate for life and raise a brood of two, I can't remember the names, but two chicks essentially. So that's how they huddle together, and they build their nests in rock buildings like they would have originally built them into rock cliffs, and that's why they're so common. And the other really key important thing to what makes these able to stay in the same place is that they're more generalists. They can change their strategy to adapt to a changing environment rather than just having to move to an environment that better suits them. And so what does that mean? It means that they can eat insects, they can eat buds off of trees, they can eat fruits, they can eat junk food that we drop, like old French fries or popcorn. All of that can support a pigeon, and because of that, they have a lot of options, even when the food gets scarce, for what they can search for and what to eat. Let's see here. What else do we have to say about these guys? And so I guess that what I would like to draw some of the comparisons with this is with this grouse here, which is a truly non-migratory bird and doesn't really move at all. And you can kind of see that they have like a similar body shape. Can't see this because their wings are down, but they both have shorter wings which are much stronger, have more sort of force behind them than the Merganzer does. And that basically allows them to fly quickly, to fly precisely, and to carry a lot more mass in fat and in feathers to keep them warm during the winter and to keep them insulated. Let's see here. Yeah, and so now we can move on. After we've looked at the migratory bird, the bird which moves, the semi-migratory or kind of homing bird, the generalist, now we can look at a true, what we call residential bird. So this is one of my favorite birds, very common around Minnesota. I have lots of memories. It's called a ruffed grouse. And so these they're very territorial. They stay in one spot for their entire life, or maybe just move around a little bit during the winter. They stay around in their spot, they keep looking for food, and there's some ways that they're able to do it. To quote Wikipedia, which they describe them as chunky, medium-sized, and with short and strong wings. And again, I think that's a good description, especially chunky. If you're chunky, it means you can hold on to heat, it means you can hold on to energy, it means you can store up for a good amount of time. And just like the rock dove or the pigeon, Ruffed grouse has a very variable diet, a diet which has a lot of options, a lot of open options. So again, they can eat buds off of trees, they can even eat leaves, they can eat berries, seeds, insects, they've been known to eat little bits of meat. Um, and by being able to eat so many different types of food, like the pigeon, they can stay in one spot. And beyond that, they can also even bury themselves in the snow. And so if you've ever been out hiking around, you might have seen a grouse. If you might have gotten too close to a grouse and almost stepped on it, and it burst out of the snow, and you might have heard the it almost sounds like a helicopter taking off or something. I think it's fun. And that is sort of a territorial sign of dominance. It's a way for them to communicate. It can be a mating sign. But these are the traits which allow a bird to stay in one place, to be a residential bird, even in a cold place, which it's being a generalist, adaptability, able to react to your environment and change your strategy to meet its challenges as opposed to having to move to a more suitable environment. And just as an example, Donnell Johnson, who apparently wrote and did a lot of research on grouse, just to illustrate, just to show you how much these things are willing to eat, he says that one grouse found in its stomach that had eaten a salamander, and another grouse had eaten a snake. So these guys, they're not picky eaters. And so with that, that's kind of my little talk, my little spiel on these three birds. And I think it would be fun if you want to come and get a closer look and kind of compare and contrast them, and I could tell you some more about some of those physical distinctions and similarities that make these. But to wrap it up, I thought I would leave you with a little story about a trumpeter swan. Trumpeters. You may have seen those. They're those long-necked, very pretty, beautiful swans with the black beaks, the pitch black legs. I really like them. And they are much more common nowadays. You can see them around here. You might hear them honk, hence the name trumpeter swan. But what you might not know, especially if you're quite young, is that trumpeter swans used to be very highly threatened. They almost went extinct. And I bring them up because they are migratory birds, naturally, at least how they evolve. But in the latter half of the 20th century, demand for bird feathers, especially hats and other fashion, from trumpeter swans is very high, and they were over-harvested, hunted, and killed, and brought down to levels which were highly threatened, and it was a very legitimate fear that we were going to lose the trumpeter swans forever, that they were going to extinct. And that would be a true tragedy. But luckily, through the concerted efforts of various regulatory agencies and academics, and especially things like people like the people at the Flathead Indian Reservation, and what's the other ones here? What was the other place?
Non-game. There was DNR's brought them back. They've been the Tamarack National Wildlife Refuge out west.
Tamarack National Wildlife Refuge, along with like the Flathead Indian Reservation and various regulatory agencies, brought a large communal project to restore these birds to life, to a high population, to a healthy population. And the way that they did that is they took eggs from Alaska and brought them, and they reared them and dropped them off up north in the wild. And here's where the migration comes into the story, and a thing that I think is really interesting is that swans used to travel upwards of like 1,000 miles. They go a long way to try and find water, open water for them to fish in, and to pick at watercress, algae, undergrowth under the water, because like the merganser duck right here, if you can't get in the water, you can't eat if you're a swan. However, once they reintroduced them, the swans didn't know how to migrate anymore. They hadn't learned it. And that almost kind of challenges the idea that migration is always an implicit, a sort of like innate or instinctual, if you've ever heard that word, process which we thought that if you just had a bird and it was born and it was never taught anything, that it would still migrate. But what we've found, partially, is that these swans do not migrate. They might travel 40, 50 miles in search for open water, such as like going to a dam or finding a place where there's water movement, so that they can get in there and eat. But they will not travel the long distances. So it's interesting how our interactions with the natural world and its interactions with us can have very profound effects and can actually even change the evolutionary course. And I think that goes both ways, for sure. So with that, I hope that you learned a little bit on the show. If you have any questions, please come